With these videos, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to split them up into learning and doing sections. So since this is really meant for the super duper beginner, that you don't know much, you're just diving into rigging for the very first time, you've only messed with Maya a little bit, maybe you've modeled a few things, maybe you've modeled a character and you want to rig it yourself, you know nothing about rigging. So I'm going to be diving into some of the tools and the different things that we'll be using inside of Maya. And so when I do that, I'll have a section called Learning that will teach you about the tools and the things that we're going to be using for the next video. If you don't want that, just skip this video and go to the doing. You're like, hey, I don't care. Just tell me what to click and I will click it and do it. I don't really care to learn the ins and outs. Or I already know a little bit. I don't want to know. I just want to go through this. Go ahead and skip this video and head to the next video. For this video, we're going to be talking about joints. So I'm going to go to a new scene just to show a few things. All right, in this scene, I'm going to create just a polycube. And I'll go back to my rigging shelf and I'll click on my joint tool right here and create some joints as well. Okay, you can hit Enter, Q or Y to finish that. Enter and any other tool setting that you switch to is just going to complete that tool. It's going to exit to a different tool. If you hit Y, it's going to do a soft enter, which means you'll still be active in the joint controller. So if I did that right now and I started making a joint chain and I wanted like another set of joint chains, I could hit Y, it will enter, and then I can create another set. So you can kind of do the same thing with G, because G just recalls the last tool that you were using. But Y is really the soft enter. So you can create multiple joint chains without them being connected and without having to exit your tool to come back to it every time. All right. So the thing to know about joints is that joints are fairly unique object inside of Maya. When you're working with like curves or NURB surfaces or polygon surfaces in this case, you will find that they have two active nodes on them. And if you go to your attribute editor with the polycube selected, you'll notice that you have a p-cube shape 1 and a p-cube 1. Okay, your p-cube 1 holds your translation, your rotate scale, the shear, rotate order, rotate axis. It is what is called your transform node. Okay, so whenever you're moving it around, it's moving this transform node. Your shape node is what you're actually looking at and what you're viewing. And those two things, even though tightly connected, are separate. And allows you to do things like if you hit your W key for your move tool and then you hit your insert key, you have actually moved to the pivot point of your object. And now we can move this pivot point. If we're like, hey, I don't want my pivot in the center of this object, I can hold V and snap it to a point on the object or in a point somewhere else. I can hold V and snap it to a joint and it will go to that joint, and I'll just hold V and snap it over to that vertice. Now if I hit insert again, that will exit the pivot point mode. And now if I move it around, it's actually moving the object. So before, we were moving the pivot point of our shape, which is why when we were moving it, our object itself wasn't moving at all. So now If I rotate, it's going to rotate from that point. And if I move it, it's going to move from that point. Okay? Joints are unique in the fact that they do not have a shape node. They have a visualization that we can clearly see, but if I hit my insert key, you will notice my joint moves when I move that insert. So unlike the cube, where the insert key got into the pivot point and I could move my pivot point without moving the object, I can't do that with a joint. I'll hit insert again and get back to just my regular transform. Okay. So the one thing you'll notice is that when I was in insert, I can move that joint without moving all of its children. So rigging is a process of manipulation. We're going to set up unique manipulations that are going to allow you to get controls and get functionality in your rig that are going to be really pleasing and easy to use. So knowing these types of things and knowing how joints work is going to be pretty vital when it comes to setting up our rig. Okay, the other thing to notice is that joints will have a rotation axis. They are automatically oriented, so that means the way they're pointed down the bone, usually on the x-axis. You can go up to skeleton and go to create joints and click on the option box. That will bring up your tools menu and settings for that tool. And you can see here, this is our orientation settings. So we could select orient to world, or which we won't use very much, but the primary axis is X with our secondary axis being Y, and our secondary axis world orientation also being Y in the positive, meaning Y is up. Other programs Z is up, but Maya defaults to Y being up. So we're going to leave these settings alone. They are generally just fine for what we're going to be doing. But you'll notice that my x-axis is going to point down the bone. So if I rotate on X, it's going to rotate around it. And you'll notice that even though all these joints are rotating around this joint here, its child, that it is oriented to, it's not going to move position. The rotation may move, but its position does not. This is really good because in our own bodies, that is what happens. We rotate around the joints, and our joints are generally oriented down the bone. So it's going to give you some behavior that you're really looking for. One of the things that we may do is we may want to change our orientation of this. So there are orient tools that you can go to. Orient joint. Nothing's going to happen because it is already oriented. But if we move this around by going to our insert key, we're technically no longer oriented down the bone, right? So if we ever do that, we can always go up to skeleton and click on the orient joint, and it's going to repoint. You'll notice all my axes there pointed down the bone. By the way, I am using the gimbal setting on my rotation tool. So if you were to hit E and press and hold E and then left click, it will bring up what's called a marking menu with the tool settings for that tool, so the rotation tool. So default is either object or world. Object will give you this, and you can kind of rotate it however you want. But if I holding E and left clicking will bring this up. If I go to gimbal, turn that on, I can't rotate it anywhere except along these axes. And this just aligns with what's happening in your channel box. So rotate it here. So we may move joints around and need to reorient them. We may want to change our joint orientation even more. In order to do that, we would want to change our local rotation axes. So that is another tool that we may be using. So we can kind of see inside of each joint, we kind of see this translate Y, translate Z, kind of manipulation handle looking thingy. That is actually a visualization of your local rotation axes. But you can't just get to that. You can't click it and change it right now. So what we want to do is we'll go to display, and we're going to go down to the transform display, and we're going to turn on local rotation axes. Now it's going to give us this X, Y, and Z on here. So now that is available. In order to select this, we want to go into component mode. We're in object mode right now, so we're going to press F8, and that's going to get us into component mode. Then up here, we have these masks that are on and off for component mode. We want to come to this question mark. And if you right click on it, you'll notice there's this local rotation axis right here. And we want to check that on. So now that square turns on, and now we can actually select that local rotation axis. One thing to note, if we are manually changing these ourselves, we can't use the gimbal. It won't, you'll notice I'm trying to move it, it's just kind of glitching and twitching back and forth. We actually have to go to, we're going to hold down E, left click again, and we're going to go to object mode. And now this is going to allow us to rotate our object. Okay, so if I didn't want my Y straight up, I could rotate it here. And now my X is still oriented down the bone, but my Y is pointing a different direction. So if I hit F8 and come back to regular object mode, I'm going to go back to gimbal, and you can see my axes. And now my Y is here, so it's going to rotate around that Y axis. So now instead of Z being the one that would kind of rotate this bone up and down, it becomes Y that does that. So there might be some stuff that we're going to come across in this rig where we'll deal with that and we'll mess with that, but that's how you can mess with that. Now we'll go ahead and go back up to display, object or transform display, and we'll click that again to turn that off so that those aren't there. And we'll be all set. So you can see this joint, the Z-axis is what would rotate it up and down. But on this one, where we just changed it, it is the Y-axis that goes up and down, and the Z is going kind of left and right. Okay. These are kind of the basics. Generally, we're just going to be using this. The other thing that we will be using is our mirror tool. So we're going to set up joints on one side of our character, and then we're going to mirror them to go the other way. So what we want to do with the mirror option is we're going to go to skeleton, and we're going to come down to the mirror joints, and we're going to go to the tools or the option box for the mirror joints. We want to set this up in a way that is going to make sense. So right now it's using the XY plane. Okay, so X going left and right, and Y going up and down. So it's going to mirror actually from here to here. But our character isn't going to be setting up that way. So we're going to use Y and Z. And when we're naming joints, left joint chain, we can have this search for an L underscore and replace it with an R underscore. We're going to do everything on the left side and then mirror it to the right. And then we'll click apply or mirror. And now it is mirrored to the other side. Okay. We can close that now. And now if we click this mirror button, it is going to do it with those settings that we've just set. So we've got this, and you'll notice the behavior is kind of opposite of each other. That is pretty nice. We do want it that way. And just to clean this up, I'm going to get rid of everything from below there and below there, so we can kind of see that just a little cleaner. Yeah, so those are the few things that we're going to do with joints. So again, we'll be using the joint tool, the mirror joint tool, and the orient joint tool. This is the button for it, but orient joints is going to be found under skeleton as well in orient joint. So let's create some joints for our character.